You're good to go. Yeah, the black marker there. Oh, yeah, okay. Right.
Layer from the glare. But anyhow, good morning. I'm back again to do another presentation. I've been invited to come and share a story about how do we live with grandfather teachers that we see just across the nation in different forms and are talked about. So I've been asked to talk about communities, in particular my own home community, and the way that these grandfather teachings have been kept alive through the day-to-day living, from contact time to present, and even before that. But along the way, I've encountered different people earlier on when these teachings began to emerge, because they were put away for a time. And if you have ever had the opportunity to meet Peter Roches, when he was coming out from his hiding in the mountains and bringing with him these birch bark skulls with etchings in them, which were a way of keeping our culture alive. So when he began to draw the diagrams, he always cautioned people about writing. When you're writing, as I'm talking, you're not listening to me. So he's always telling the youth, as he was talking, please put away your pens because you don't need that. Your brain will register and remember every single word that I speak. Put your faith and trust in the power of your brain and in creation. We were made to have this kind of capacity to do those things. But to trust in them. Trust in the voice, trust in the story, trust in the teacher. So sometimes it's not an easy thing to do because we've been so influenced by that external culture, that external world. And I talk about that at home, my family, with the community, in sharing what I understand and the way that I was raised, how these teachings are incorporated into our day-to-day life. So I've been walking through a story, drawing a diagram, and I've been focusing on term Abanoji, small infant that's born, and Mishnah Bear or Mishnah Beck, plural, singular. When you break these words apart, or these terms, it asks you questions, but it also provides you with answers. So this one here tells a story about origin. This one asks you, where did you come from? So to answer, you look at this one. First, what it's saying about who we are. And I've been drawing the diagram out. Say that there's a continuum. We go back and look in time. And we talk about Wabanong. Wabanong says, I'm going to look back. We're going to meet the sun this morning, have a ceremony. And Wabanong says, I'm going to go back to the beginning of time, that first origin of our coming into being as people or as a person. And along the way, I've traveled quite a journey. And in my journey, I've captured my experience. So we've put that down in these diagrams. So up here, this is what Peter showed us when he first came out from the mountains. He drew these kind of diagrams. Talked about a medicine wheel. And then from there, began to draw other diagrams. This one here began to enlarge it. We began to talk about experience. For this one, that positive and up here, negative. These two relate to our wellness. The keeping of our wellness relates to what these ones are speaking about. This one here, we talk about Enoch McGarren. But there's two forms of it here. There's another one that check out in here. Say that this one is a 90-degree angle to that one. But we're really speaking about spatial references. And when you look at that first letter over here, that's what you're capturing. Spiritual dimension. Put away all the physical activity of life, objects around. If you ask the question, where would you put it if you were having to put it somewhere? It puzzles you. They have no place to put it. It doesn't seem to be present, being able to do that. When you step on one side of that line, we speak about our presence, physical form. So we today start speaking about the energy in the form of a wave. And when you draw it out, above and below, high energy, waves close together, low energy, waves far apart. You take the space and turn it into an energy, it produces these kinds of forms that today we can measure with some of the instruments. But it becomes more difficult to measure that one. The length of that wave. The length of that wave, you start talking about a gravitational wave. On this end over here, you start talking about gamma rays. Physical form of how to look at that universe. So we understand that. Say, well, we work with that. So when we start talking about this origin up here, by putting in that Star World. Start referencing those behaviors. And we're talking about currently the most we see is a 7. And at home, I'm saying to people, you're missing one. And which one is it? So we draw these out to say that here, I'm being kind, sharing, care, and then fortitude or strength. In concert with these ones, putting in awareness, pick up, take home, and adapt. That fourth part of that idea of Petahtegoose constitution. Put those together in concert with those honesty, respect, and today I'm speaking more going on that, continuing on that circle. More today. Wisdom. So when we think about living at home and looking at our family, stages of life, fires, the teaching that goes with those fires, prophecies. We start looking at home, how were these carried? How were they incorporated into the teaching? How did we use them to engage with the European nations when they began to arrive here? Because over here, we start taking a look at this one here speaks about deviancy. Deviant. This one says that one is straight and true. You get to live what those grandfathers are saying, it will produce this kind of a result for you. You'll have to ensure that that pathway of harmony is achieved. I want to live what I'm to do. And along the way, we began to see this other kind of activity with the cranial here. Different ways to describe and talk about types of culture. And we look at this one here. When I was over at Cambrian College, when they first contracted me to go and teach, I took my my understanding of what these scrolls that describe in the way that I was nurtured at home by my parents, I had to go back to continue my journey. For a time, I was separated from my parents. I began to, over here, beside Muji, I began to suffer. I lost my ability to feel. My emotions, my mental, those qualities that are needed as a young child, they were cut short. Today, we see a literature being written which talks about hold on to your children. And a great part of that textbook relates to care of the young infants. But inside there, it talks about this birth of this one and the care of that little one. What happens to them when you're not forming those relationship bonds? And when I think about that family, mom and dad, we have our variety of children, different forms in the way that we can look at them as being distinct from one another. Brought them in different ways. Everyone is secret, as described in the language. Everyone is unique, distinct, and but they're needing to be guided. And what kind of guidance are you going to share with them in doing that? So what happened is that we became disrupted. And I was doing some work last night, going back to take a look at the continuation of the lineage of the kings and queens from Great Britain, because we came into contact with that, with those families and those people. And who was present at these varying times? What did they present to us? What were they bringing with them? So I was going back, because at home we're involved in a large claim. We're going back to challenge Canada and Ontario. We participate in an annuities claim, but our sister and brothers and sisters, but we're having to step back because of the nature of activity which occurs here in this region. And we have been working somewhat close with our sister community down at Manitoulin, the Kumikon people. They have participated in the making of that tree. So it complicates activity that occurs on the land, and we have some that are very strongly attached with that pathway to being what we would call as being assimilated. So last night we were having a chat at the council table and talking about a young lady that was wanting to come back home. And she had made application to EIA through that process described under the Indian Act legislation. And I was saying that's nonsense. We don't do that. It's not necessary. What we require already exists. We don't have to change anything. We just have to apply the law that's before us. But you have to know what it is. I've been speaking about that at home with our council, with the community, very slowly waking up. Well, last night we were emphasizing about the especially young lady, young girl, wanting to come back home, but she was being told, "I'm sorry, your blood is not pure enough. Yeah, we can't take you." But it certainly raises questions about how you measure qualities that you're going to look at and making determinations about your being accepted. Where does that come from? why do we copy someone else's practices and culture? That's what this one here. Ethnocentric. Racism emerged from that concept. Study that up a little bit. I was talking with some psychologists back in the 1980s timeframe when we were having difficulty with the ideas around truancy. Children not feeling good about going to school. And children dropping out of school as soon as they leave grade 7, grade 8, grade 9, grade 10. Here, this is the sequence. This is your infant child. This is your young teen. That first one. Talk about all that. Good lifetime. Your needs are all cared for. Your parents look after you. But during this time here, it's critical. What kind of behavior that you show them. Because it's during that time you're forming those attachment bonds. Those bonds of respect and love with your parents. I've been sharing that circles with you. There's quality up there. Honest. You don't lie to your children. It happens. Like it's broken. You start to sever the bond of relationship, of attachment. The child doesn't come to bond with you as readily. Because associated with that honesty being broken is pain. And we're having to say that's not what we want to be doing to our children. So to deal with that side, we have extended family. Auntie and uncle become important. And looking at qualities around discipline. Teaching. We're going down this list here, looking at those behaviors that you're wanting to use to guide what you're to do. So we see them: honesty, wisdom, truth. Truth is one that I'm taken out from that circle. And we're putting two, I'm putting two in there to deal with this shifting that has occurred. So when we start to take a look at the two that are missing today and what we're having to do back home, one of them is that we're going to deal with this ideas around discipline. So I've been sharing a story which is coming from our contact. We look at ideas around that Bible. And in that world that we've come into contact in my own life, I experienced what we call journey around that Catholic faith. And I recall going through these ceremonies of being baptized. I don't remember that one, but I do remember being schooled to go and confess your sins at about the age of 6. And why the age of 6? Why is it picking that time frame? Well, it's during that period we start to become aware of our realizing that I'm not alone. I come to create my imaginary friends. But my emotion inside, in my mental capacity, starts to become noticed in terms of my surrounding. I begin to give expression to that in the way that I relate with that world, my siblings. We begin to understand qualities around what we're trying to get to is love, emotion. How do we show that? How do we live that? How do we bring that one home? Well, it has a lot to do with our children being able to mimic. They copy what we do. If they see you looking at the family and they hear a lot of activity that goes on in the home, and we see a lot today where we talk about the trauma. But the old ones tell us not to do that. The language doesn't carry a lot of the language that we would be using to describe trauma. We have more words relating to describing images of wellness. But trying to describe trauma, pain, suffering, evil, those kinds of words, there are fewer. And that's something that we're having to consider. We didn't fabricate language, which tells us that we're to treat our relatives with a lot of evil. At home, looking at the behavior of my father, I've never heard him use foul language. It just wasn't in him to use that kind of language in talking about negative activity and behavior that was in the audience. He'd say, ouch, ah. He'd say expressions, but there was no language there to describe or inflict on anyone ideas around causing pain. And I recall at one time, a young man had been partying a lot. He walked over to our home there and he brought a couple of pieces of beer with him. He sat in front of my dad and he's pouring all this alcohol. My dad was looking at him. All those bottles were filled with that alcohol. He wanted to share that with me. Or you come here to try and tease me, to think that I need that. Because I think that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to embarrass me. You're trying to make me feel small because you have all this chemical and you think I'm going to beg that you share that with me. But he didn't. He said, you know, it's very, very sad if you come here and you get me to this kind of a experience. I'm very, very hurt because I was over in Europe not long ago, and I saw young men. They were not even men; they were young boys. Who were coming back from that battlefield. Comes missing, it's missing, it's missing. Very, very sad event outcomes that these young boys had participated in going onto the battlefield and fighting in the war. I had to look after them. That was my role. I was trained to be a medic. He says, when I look at you, I don't see this quality of strength and bravery. I see a young man filled with fear. And you're trying to use that fear to make you feel small. And that's why I'm so pained looking at you. Because you're telling me you haven't learned. You haven't learned how to be part of the family. You haven't learned how to look after the community. You haven't learned how to be a man. So at home, and working with people, to go out and participate in that journey of reflection. That's what we do at that puberty time, as well as around the age of 6 and 7, when they give them that first experience of facing isolation. You separate from your family, you separate from your community to face your dependency. And in facing that dependency, you begin to see yourself as being quite weak. You feel that in your body when you're not having your friends, not having your food, not having your water. Your body starts to ache. The longer you go into that experience time, the more pronounced that it becomes. I have my buddy out in the west, in the stateside, Michael Yellowbird, Dr. Michael Yellowbird. He talks about his experience in being taken out onto the land, being taken up into a high mountain, standing there in the hot sun. His care person, his grandpa, community. It's part of their tradition. Go on top of a high rock out in the bright sun and stand there all day. So I came to appreciate water much more. I don't like to waste water, not even a drop, because of knowing how needy I am, how dependent I am on the quality of my land being able to take care of me. So that becomes important when you start thinking about what these grandfather teachings are saying to us about how we are to carry them. So we look at that honesty, we look at that respect, and then we can about this wisdom component. In that wisdom, we're beginning to start to understand what we have been living at home. And my father would always ask me to come and walk with him, come and sit with him, to go fishing with him. Because just during that time, he was showing me in the way that he lived how the culture is carried. Similarly with my mother. When she was growing up, she was always forever working. And I used to ask her questions about why don't you take some time to sit down? And she would say, I like working. If I sit down, I feel like I'm being lazy and I'm not doing my job that I'm supposed to be doing. I love working. But inside, in her experience, I asked her about her being abused, about being subjected to evil and pain. And she would say, yes, those things happened to me. I suffered a lot in the times that I was living. He had 14 children. First 5 were lost before they're 14 years old. They never got through these 50 stages. They barely touched. Maybe to the next one. Next one up there. You start to go out to show yourself in the way that you relate with the world around you. You begin to experience life outside of your house in contact with that world. And psychiatrists tell you, and this is what they've observed from around the world, in that first 14 years, 15 years, 12 years of life, if you have picked up the grounding of your culture, you can go anywhere in the world and you will be successful. When we think about our youth at home today and what they're learning, they're not getting what my mom used to say is good teaching. So we sometimes are negligent in how we guide our children. The children are just immersed in ideas around wanting to be helpful. They copy you, they want to wash the dishes, they want to pick up the party, all kinds of things. Sometimes parents will cut them off and say, you don't want to do that. It's not your job, and all sorts of reasons are given to block that behavior. And ideally should be getting them that little stool to come and sit at the table there, or the counter, or cleaning the dishes, or preparing the food, and let them play with. But for them, it's not playing. To them, it's a helping, contributing, because that's what they see as being what they wanted to do. They want to just naturally give. So when my mom, I asked her about teaching, and I asked her about learning, and I asked her about education. Whenever I use those bigger language terms, education, I don't know what that means. Doesn't make any sense to me. I said, oh, well, I have to change that. I used to ask her in more simple terms. How did you live? What did you do? And she would fill me with stories about being able to do those more simple directions in terms of what I was seeking from response. So in dealing with the pain side of outcomes from our behaviors, down here, not far, we've been dealing with waste from an kind of gold dump. It's dumping arsenic into the water systems, the drainage basin, one at the west end of Long Lake, and the infamous. And in between Lake Panage, Round Lake, and Long Lake, there's a river that connects the lakes. But when that gold mine was opened, they were dumping waste onto the land. And they were using arsenic in the chemical treatment process to extract the gold from the rock. The arsenic chemical is toxic and poisonous for us. In small quantities, our bodies can somewhat handle it. In the very minute quantities. But there's no safe limit. It's like radioactive uranium. There's no safe limit. You get one in your body and it can create havoc. Arsenic is, we look at the periodic table in chemistry because it's having the same family relationship. Phosphorus, which we need in our bones and our blood. So it's in the same family. Your body doesn't understand that when it picks up an arsenic, it's thinking it's picking up phosphorus. But when it begins to use it, try to nurture your body, it finds that it's picked up the wrong one. So it tries to get rid of it. Your immune system responds and goes and forms a berm, a barrier around, and then picks it up in your body. When you feel your body beyond its capacity to respond, you start to fill your body with those toxic materials. Start to become distributed through your organs and also the pH and form illness and then cancer. In coincidence at home, the families where we see a lot of cancer in the liver and in the kidneys is coming from families who've eaten a lot of fish coming out of the lake that we're seeing a lot of that contaminant. So we were asking the governments in Canada and Ontario to do some what we call base sampling, to take a look at internal chemistry of our people, so that we can begin to raise flags about our overall well-being based on the influx of contaminant in our bodies. Try to get into preventive medicine, care of our people. So when we think about these diagrams and how do we work with them, how do we use them to guide us, we take a look at what they're supposed to do. Then we take a look at how we've deviated away from. Try to look at the outcomes of what that's doing to us. And we see a lot of negative things here. Not being responsible. So we remind Canada, when you take a look over there, it's one of the first ones we look at is Constitution. How is the Constitution protecting you in your living? How is it helping you to thrive in your wellness? So I've been saying at home, when you look at the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, what does it say about relationship with Anishinaabe people, or relationship with the Cree, relationship with Haida, relationship with all our sister nations? So we look at that term. As I was speaking yesterday about the family, the community, about protecting this little girl that's wanting to become home. I'm saying my grandfather teaches looking at her. She's my child. And I'm required to take care of her, protect her. So that Indian Act, under that section 6, where it starts talking about our people and our right to remain as a distinct population of people, as a nation, is being undermined. And even the court systems of Canada are going in that direction of extinguishment. And that young lady being not permitted to register, yes, you cannot be part of this community because your parent, your mom, your father is white. You can be Canadian, but you cannot be Anishinaabe. My question would be for Canada to say, well, you bring in all these populations of people from around the world. And when they come here, in time, they can become Canadians. But something happens on their arrival. One is that you forget about the place that you have come from. It's in your memory, but it's extinguished. And when you begin to follow the law of Canada and Ontario, or the town municipal governments. And based on your ability and enthusiasm, you can become successful. You can participate in the economy and you can work and get ahead. But from our side, when we come here, we're going to Canada, we're not allowed to benefit really from our inheritance. Being able to relate with the land and provide. In our experience, we were living without money. No need for money. Our cultural practices never created the need for that product. If we were looking at the capacity of that land, how did it contribute to our overall well-being?
Private practice. She is local.
And then the understanding of
Sort of
our
eclectic way.
body
Guide. Very good.
requires
She offers
that wellness of that land
Judy is very versatile in many interventions
and economy.
and mask making. Judy now it's Judy.
So when we think about the economy,
Judy would support me only by providing me with different intervention options and session goals and feedback.
a sustainable way to live. On Facebook, Dr. Suzuki talks about indigenous nations of the world living sustainable modes of life. It's not based on keeping importing money. It's not really. It's related more to qualities within a human being. What motivates you? What drives you? And we see that over here, we start talking about these qualities. And being aware. Being guided by behaviors that we talk about as kind of other teachers. we see in there. Generosity. Is it present in that wheel? Some wheels it is. But in the mix that we see being used quite frequently today, it's really not there. But we see a duplicate. We start looking at the behavior. And we look at honesty and truth. Honesty produces truth. If you're not going to lie, truth becomes fact. Truth is fact. We look at the world around us, blue sky, rainbow, nice green rain, all factual, physical presence. Last week, we were talking about working with children. Questions at the end. How do we work with children? Well, it has a lot to do with story. So when we think about at home, the importance of these toys, these sacred items, they become center. When we pick that one up, we have our children and grandchildren with us. Sounds that it makes influences. The voice that we speak influences. So we share with them those songs, those stories. When we pick these ones up, and we dance with them, and play with them. So when we go out on the land, we take that little rattle with us. When we see a bird, shake the rattle just to get the attention of that bird. But we work with those sacred items in ways which are constructive and healthy. And that's important for the child to see. But when we don't do that, when we don't even expose them to these items, sometimes when I was talking with the elders that were being invited down to Trent University, I'd sit down and I would chat with them on occasion, and I would ask them about they're not wanting to bring some of these items with them to those gatherings. And they began to share with me their spiritual view of how they're looking at the world. And that's what I was wanting to see. So when they came, they didn't know what kind of world that the university was having. Was it right for me to take my innocent family members into that kind of environment? Were they going to become contaminated and hurt by dropping them into this foreign place? So they say, no, I left my one left him. Because I know over there it's going to be very careful. But when I bring them over here, I don't know how the people are going to respond. In our experience, we came into contact with the European nations. They did not welcome. They saw these as foreign, and they saw them as evil. Because of what it did to me. I couldn't be exploited. I was not able to learn about wanting to be a slave. That's strong in your heart and in your mind that influences. You begin to understand what these teachings are saying to you. But when you see that innocent child on the roadside, you want to get up over there and take care of them. So there's some truth to the stories about takes a community to raise a child. Within the community, that's something that has shifted. I talk about that in my living experience at home, not only our community, but being able to travel across the country within other communities. We see a shift in the style of living, the pattern of living. We move from being distributed on that land to subdivision in the little boxes called confinement with one another. So sometimes I'm not with my immediate family that's around me in close contact in a way that I have experienced being distributed more along the way and living in according to customs and practices of our culture. Shifting has occurred. And it has disrupted the social fabric of our people. The way that we live. So what happens? This is something that we remember. Sure. He said, you know, when Dad went off to war, Dad took me and he rented a room in the city. He said, I'm going to trust with my faith in the neighbors around that they're going to come in and help you while I'm gone. So he would arrange to have wood delivered to the home. And Mom could get the meals. And then look after the ones that were left. Watchful eyes. Within 1 week, all my belongings that Dad had put outside around to look after me were stolen. I was very, very hurt. Now that's 2 times that's happened. When I was a young child, at about 10 years age, we were living over here at the west end of Long Lake. We have 2 communities that we had used during that winter season, the season of the seasons. In the month of March, we would leave our central community over at Tickmachine and go down to the west end of Long Lake. Because down there was a nice big sugar forest. Trees. So we would go and live in among those nice trees during the time of that maple syrup season. And sadly, adjacent to that maple forest, that's where gold was found. And during one of those times when life became extremely difficult, during the First World War time, 1914 to 1918. That's when my mother was at the age of 10 years of age, 12 years of age, 3 years of age. And then from the gold mine would come in and steal. And on one occasion, they came, they just completely destroyed our community. So in talking about these kinds of experiences with my mother, about her feeling and about her mental wellness, she told me about ideas around life teaching. what those men are showing me that have come into the community is that they have not been educated. But they did not get good teaching. And that's what they're showing me. That's what's sad. The behavior. She was able to isolate that behavior. Still look at the persons as being like us over here. Most people are blessed with life in the way that we are. They were created in the same way. Sadly, they've been misguided by sad influence, evil influence by teaching. And that's what they're showing me. That's what they showed me when they came into my home for belongings. So I have compassion for them. I have pity for them. But I don't hate them. So when she's able to speak like that about her experience, I said, she's extremely well educated to understand the complexity of social dynamics. I said, I had a good teacher. So when you think about the stages over here, how we pick them up, that's where my parents were saying, you have to live these, and that's where Peter would impress upon us when he came to visit with us to show the diagrams in those scrolls. When he began to draw them out, and I looked at them and said, oh, I know about that. Because we've been living that at home. This is what mom and dad were trying to get me to come to know. So I've been trying as best as I can to better understand what they're saying. So when I go out onto the land and I take my pipe and I sit down or sit at the feather over there or onto the land, go into a time of reflection, go into the time to visit with my relatives up here. So inside this book, with my son in the front cover, but inside there's a little story that I share about traveling with my granddaughter and cousins of the family and a couple of little friends going out to visit with the land, to visit with the forest, visit with the trees, not look at them as forests, look at them as family and relatives. You get a different reaction, develop a finer appreciation of what the human is. And that's what we're wanting to get our youth to come to understand today. And when we teach them about what how are we providing to them the guidance that they're searching for. They want to learn and understand, but we don't have the types of environment where that's more easily achieved. We fight with the school boards about development of curriculum, but we want to have our children understand it. So I speak to say with the school boards, school books that you use, you pick them up. And it has, and speaking about stories, there has to be stories in there which speak of me, but in a way which is constructive and healthy. So a lot of those books that are in those shelves of the school that our children are picking up, many of them have to be taken out. They've got to be replaced with other books, which is more well of that diversity in that human population. And what people are learning at home, especially from the parent side, they've got to go back and take a look at this one here. This ethnocentric idea. Because inside the cultures of the world, this is the one that's currently prominent. It's not shifted. Where one language, what could become the nation. Green light, go ahead. Every nation of Europe wants to put themselves in that position, and they do. And they bring that with them, Canada. And when I speak with them, through church books or visit on occasion, I'll say to them, it's necessary that you take the components of your culture that teach you how to be self-reliant, a motivation. But it's in your way of teaching. You're having to make some shifts. So in our guide, so these are cultures of the world. Figures. And ask yourself questions about how do I relate with these that I'm placing behind me. And sadly, what's happened is that racism, the ethnocentric worst component, has become one of the central motivators inside the culture. That's where you're having to go back and study, to reflect on what it is that you were doing. Because inside the Christian church, when you take a look at the stories around creation, speak about that one. Say that this quality or this character, you speak of as God. In that Bible, when you take a look at what God has actually, see, God had some truth. Two boys. One of them followed quite closely and became to be eventually the one that was depended on, one that was the helper. Speak of character Michael the archangel. He's the one that's blessed. You see this kind of an image in what the Bible these characters that are following their footsteps of their grandfather or their father. Then you see the one which is the deviant. The deviant is always getting into trouble, always being mischievous. You take a look at the return of that one after he's been exiled, that he's been thrown out the door. And in some of the stories, you see the parent welcoming that one back home. And the one that was staying home objects about the return of the sibling that was deviant. So inside, you take a look at that story. This character, God creates a place called evil, called hell. Place of evil. And a child with a man, woman. We don't know whether or not they'll survive in the place when they're all alone. But ultimately, that person returns. when they do, parent opens the door. Welcome. So inside, you take a look at that. That's what we put into our model of law. Allowing for that action. And the challenge for the person that's welcome home is to exhibit the qualities that in the time of absence, whether or not they come back and pick up those features. By chance, by experience, have they gone back to learn what those qualities are saying? And when they come home, the challenge is for them to exhibit that behavior. If they do, then there's an opening of the door to say, you're welcome. But if they don't, then there's an obligation on you as the parent to remind the family member that you're not quite ready to come home yet. So we're going to put you back into isolation. And that's what we see in the prison system today. Because in there, we're looking for remorse. Remorse has to do with this quality of aware. Have they learned that? It's a reflection of what you were living when you were a child. Can you distinguish in between right and wrong in terms of being morally grounded? That's what they're showing you. If they haven't, and that's what Dr. speaks of. The individual, these men and women who appear on the street, he says in his writing with certainty, and confident that every single one of them is not self-aware. It's a remarkable thing to say. Right and share and say, this is what you see in the street. Inside, there's a confusion. They don't see themselves as being central. They're responsible for the care of that. That's what's been absent and missing in that home environment. When we start to think about this wisdom over here, wisdom of our ancestors, wisdom of our grandparents, wisdom of our family. That's what we're nurturing to keep alive. So in our community, we're wanting to go back to the land. And people at home sometimes they're struggling. They're not knowing what kind of curriculum to put together. That's the sad part. Because they're duplicating what we see in the school systems. Thinking that's going to provide the answer. No. We've got to go back to our model. And there's a wisdom in there, which has carried us to the centuries of time from the Ice Age. In our experience here, living at the Ice Age time influences our creation story. When we speak about that little muskrat going into the pond and then going down into the water, And from the bottom, picks up some little debris and then it comes to the surface and it builds up an island. I remember studying over here in the geology department, looking at the concept around eutrophication. Said, oh, it's captured in our creation story. Our people are geologists. They understand erosion because they've lived it here on Turtle Island. They witnessed that in the behavior of the animals. So go back and take a look at our stories. They're filled with that kind of a experience, but more there's knowledge in them that is influencing us. So my father, when we would go out in summertime and think of the black fly and mosquito seasons, used to wonder why he never took any chemicals with him. He'd take raid and all these other chemicals today. Well, we don't need any of that stuff. What do you mean? When they eat my flies out there. Flies are not going to bother you. I said, oh, no. I see that old spray bottle over there with chemical. I want to take it. You don't, that's just going to make it hard for you to travel. You've got to learn that outside it's filled with cups, it's filled with containers, it's filled with straws, it's filled with medicine. So he was beginning to show me, and then beginning to teach me that he had a good understanding of that. So in the evening hours, he would go outside and go out onto the grassy trail, go down to find some grass, those tubular straws of grass. We cut them in the nodes. Almost like a stick of bamboo, you have this big straw. We'd find one that was having a small diameter. And he'd go and pick a piece of bark from the birch tree. And he'd make that little cup. Then he'd go around some plants and make a pulp, and that's in water. Put that together in that cup. Then he'd put the straw in there. Then he'd go. And he was creating self-spray. This pressure from his blowing of his from his lungs created a airflow. And where do we see that by? Physics. So we hear about what we call Bernoulli's principle. Bernoulli's principle in studying engineering. We look at flow through pipes, water systems, all kinds of liquids, through pressurized container distribution systems. It says that if you're standing still, there's no pressure around the equalized. But if you create by movement, therefore across the top, there's an increase in pressure. And what happens is that because the pressure has been decreased, the liquid from the bottom will go up the tube and try to fill after the pressure has been decreased. And from there, distributed in the space where that airflow is passing. But to equalize differential pressure. So my dad understood that. And that's what he was showing me. He built that little aerosol spray using natural materials from the land. So that kind of experience in my travel with my father, I began to see that this concept of wisdom is there. He had a very good comprehension. So what do you study for these principles? Going up to primary school, secondary school, and up into university. See, my dad was a university educated person. He didn't learn that by going to European school, but he learned it through observation and through teaching and living experience with that. So if I said Bernoulli's principle, Dan, please explain this to me. You look at me kind of puzzled. I don't know what you're talking about. So, oh, Dad, is it, you remember you showed me this this cup here, and you were telling me I don't have to carry all these containers around when I'm traveling in the bush with those insects. They're not going to bother me, and then just learned how to adapt to some of that medicine. Whoa. I learned that in physics at the university. So you're above the second year level of training. Think about the, say, the knowledge of our elders within the community, seniors that have lived our traditional cultures. They have a very good understanding of science. They have a very in-depth understanding of psychology and sociology. As a teacher, in ways that made it easy for us to understand and know. When we go through the circle here, kindness and weird respect, care and pick up, care and take home, going up that knowledge curve. I begin to see the associations. Education evaluation. Begin to take a look at over here. There's this one that emerges. Become competent requires of you enriched understanding. That's what competency evaluates. Do you know what you're doing? All tests that we look at, which are used for evaluation, is trying to consider that component. You get that if you can demonstrate and show that you. So at the university level, the BA programs general, you're guided by your professor. Go out and search in the libraries, pick up the ideas, and use them to develop your own essay. these explanation. Evaluation is made to show that you can relate to what those ideas express. That we're able to extract from sources. So in science, our system of education, in our family care, we have those present. But they're needing to take some time to document, or having to get out from the fears. So back in the time of what they call George Manuel, Robert Lightning, elders from the West that were influencing our coming into contact with Canada, Ontario, politics in our area around here. What we do. But I used to work with Ronnie over at Cambridge, and he brought into to be over at the community as well as instructors. So I got him to help look after me on one of my fasting experiences. So I was out on the line fasting, and he was helping to come in and check. I sitting talk with him and chat with him. He says, "Oh, I didn't realize when I was coming here, the culture was so strong. I drive by all the time going by the highway, and I'd see all the homes and cars I was prejudging. I was thinking that you were more assimilated. Begin to understand that you have a very good solid understanding. And it's good to meet with you. Work with you. We need collaboration to deal with the ideas that we're struggling with. It was my buddy Jim McGregor. We were sitting down with one of these learned people from the European world, Stafford Beer. Pulled Stafford Beer's name up on the internet, on Google. And take a look at how this man speaks. Very, very troubling to try and follow the way his mind is working in the world. Super advanced in terms of how he relates. It was that man that he sat with at home. My brother and I. But it was Wilfred Owl. And he says, you know, after sitting with you, I've come to have a different appreciation. I was thinking that when I came here, I was going to encounter people who lack understanding. But it was Jim McGregor who came up with the statement. You must get ahead without becoming lost. That's a remarkable observation. By Jim to see that and come up with this simple expression. These older chiefs that came into our community. That's what's remarkable about it when you sit and gather wisdom. See the wisdom. A lot of times there's a lot of waste that occurs that you have to go through and experience. But it's these rare moments where you're able to sit and pick up these gems. That's what we're wanting to keep. And it's through collaboration that becomes possible when you take the time. And when I would go to the meetings, I'd get up early in the morning and go to the sunrise ceremonies. Go to those gatherings, evening hours, sundown ceremonies. When I'd go there, I'd be the only young man sitting with these. Like to see these students. So when I visit with them, talk with them, they'd say, thank you for coming. We hold these gatherings in the hopes that more of the political leadership would show up here. And it's discouraging when they don't come because we have these ceremonies for them. They would say, maybe I'm wasting my time coming here. Maybe I should just stay home and go and visit with the bear. He seems to have more appreciation. Those people, those knowledge keepers, finding them and being able to sit with them and work with them is what we're wanting to keep alive. And it's not an easy thing to do. And some of them are so distant from our homes. It asks you to travel, which is what this wandering time focuses on. The next stage of that development, the next stage of that growth. It takes you up to about the age of 20 or so, and your brain is still growing. Your bodies may be mature to some degree, but it's your brain inside that's the center of that time. Encourage you to go and visit, to experience what some of life is about. Okay, when I do that, I would be traveling this part over here. Pick up. Doesn't mean to come home with all those young ladies. You harvest the knowledge which is around. That's what we want you to share. When you go someplace, they tell you this thing here. Keep it close. These ones, you keep open. Trusting in your memory. What you hear, what your eyes see, it's going to get locked into your brain like a computer. Even better. This one doesn't break down unless it's after. That's what Peter would tell us. That pen, throw it away, you don't need that. But it requires from you close attention. So when you go someplace, that's what you do with this thing. Sit down and talk, you may ask a question, but you listen to the story, listen to the answers that are given to you. Most of the elders, when they talk, they say, I don't know very much. Well, they're just saying that they're dependent. And when you come, you're actually nurturing me. Because it's that story that I do last time. And, say that we travel. Sometimes journeys. We move along. sometimes one is going to. Sometimes. One is going to stay home, two will move on, one will stay, and one will continue on. When this one returns, what do they share? That's what's inside those books that we see in the library. People have gone on journeys, talk about what their interests are and have been. Document. I look forward to visiting when they come. Yes, the young man, he was down in South America, visiting with ayahuasca. His brain was sadly influenced by the statement. He was not able to find a way to calm. It was opened by that. These memories. For ways of being able to silence the gate at turning off that switch. Saying, well, you have to go back. Take that one with you. Not these individuals. Any one of them. When you sleep, you take time to visit every single one. You have to go through 1,000 days. You visit every single one. Because that's what your brain is trying to show you. But now it's done. The brain is trying to analyze. And you're not taking time to allow that to occur. What you have to do is take time to make it happen. Because that's what's inside speaking of. What you're having to do is take that. Into ceremony. You go and visit to the mountain, go into the sweat lodge, go into reflection time. Wherever you go, take the time. And when you're there, when you're doing that, make sure you have someone that understands where you're walking. Why? So at home, when we think about our young youth that are going out and young women this past winter, this even this past fall, some young boys were out of a hunt camp going out to harvest these moose. And we had people at home trying to teach them. And when we start to see some of the other behavior that was being expressed at the time, that they haven't gone yet in terms of the sequencing of the ceremony things. Second step. work with some of them to go through that first step. Go out and land. Just experience putting away your dependencies and your needs. Put away water. Just go into isolation for a moment. And then you come back, talk about what did you breathe, what was going through your mind, how did you feel? They'll tell you. You felt alone. Tell you something about how close they are connected with their home. If they don't see the birth, they don't see the animal, don't see anything around them as being filled with spirit and alive. They don't experience. I meet family when I go out there. They lose that. So we're wanting to get them back there. So those young boys and parents sending them out, talking with some of the parents, they say, I can't understand why my son is going out to pray to go out and kill a moose. Doesn't seem to make sense to me going out there and doing that. But saying, oh, if you hear yourself in the question that you're asking. Question you are asking is a nice question, but it's not the one that you need to be asking. What you want your child to encounter is the outcome of what that emotion is producing. You're going out there to kill this harmless, majestic animal. In doing that, you're being extremely evil. Because you're violating the teaching about not taking life. So you're not showing ideas around concepts of remorse, concepts of attachment, concepts of care, concepts of relationship. You're breaking all those. You're going out to kill that animal. And you're treating it more like a trophy than you are put on your table for your family. Missing a major component of what the hunt is providing for us. Yes, it's nice to put the man who's up on the wall to remind you of how majestic that animal is, what that animal has within it, in terms of qualities. Those are to be admired. But there's another side which is more important and relevant to taking care of your family relationship with your siblings. That's the love that we want you to come to know. When you take a look at that moose, you say, well, that moose gave me his life. That moose gave me her life. So that expression that I speak about in all people's teaching, they say, remember that phrase, remember this phrase, when the banana kick. I, as a person, I am dependent and I need my friends, my relatives, my family. I need that land. And ultimately, when I go back and take a look at each of them, I have to come to understand, and say, well, I am that lion, I am that moose. I am that bear, I am that bird. Because in spirit, that's what we come to know and relate to when we say technology. It's present. So getting there and coming to visit and coming to know, that's what's inside these models. So there's a wisdom that we're harvesting, that we're picking up and coming to know when we walk that journey and live it. So it's a gift. So when you say miigwech, there's a wide breadth of life there that I'm wanting to take some time to acknowledge. When you say generosity is missing from the medicine, we only say, well, it's miigwech to say that the Creator is so generous. It's given me all that I need in order to thrive. But I have to learn how to be participant in that family. Parents looking after me. I was having to be taken back home again after coming out from that hospital. I was in there for a part of 3 years. And during that time, inside I was shut down from living out in the world. But that's my brain taking care of me. Losing track of time, losing attachments, bonds that we need to live well. So those were all posed to protect me. My parents, fortunately, they understood what they were needing to do in order to save me. Otherwise, I'd probably be out in the street like all the other people that we see on the street that are walking in public, activity like that. I probably would have died of it. But my parents not been able to take care of me. So I was extremely fortunate that Dad understood. Because he was taking me here, taking me here, taking me here, and taking me here. More people. In Vermont, the community was engaged. Just after 22 before references. I returned home after going to school. So now you've got to come back home and do some helping here. So when I went back, I became associated with the Blue Black with the community recreation, like all the programming that was occurring there. They put me into the lead chair and said, help do this. You can now you have better control with words now. You can read those papers. I may have some ideas, but it's you guys that have to do the work. You have to coordinate, you have to organize. Do that alone, it's not going to happen. And we have to say, well, recognize that you're expensive. That's part of what the outcome over here. We have to come to understand that. In the time that you are able to work with families and community and people sharing living, you openly share. Don't put a price tag. And that's what I say with people. Whatever I say, or whatever I speak, whatever I do, by all means, copy, do whatever you want with it. Please don't exploit it. It's for our people. need to learn how to engage and work together. Because that's what's been disrupted in terms of family life in our communities. We've forgotten how to do that because of the teaching being denied. So in that Indian Act, you look at the content of it in the early stages. We'll be sharing some of that this afternoon. So think about what I've been sharing with you. Diagrams. These are the pathways of the nations of the world. Each of them following this kind of a close line, but get out from that kind of thinking, because that's what's inside our nationality. Not to discriminate. That's what this model gives us with respect all people. Come to work with them in relationships of harmony. Be praiseworthy. Inside the word etymology, that's what it's saying to us. If we like, that's going to sit, and we have a responsibility to live with it in a way that's going to be respectful. For youth today, they're not learning about those kind of thinking. They're at home, what's they going to think about our membership codes, our citizenship codes. We're exhibiting ideas around wanting to vote. I want to stand by myself. I want to win this big administration office by myself. Because that's all these things my neighbor's expense. That's the kind of thought you see when people are talking about their membership codes. Who are we going to allow to become taking that time to visit with it. We're at home. Session number 3. We're going on session number 4.
That was just a teaser.
Yeah.
Stay tuned for next week. You'll hear more about this.
Probably gonna close with this particular session, but I'm addressing more that quality of that wisdom. Going around that circle. In the morning time or evening, or whenever I light up that pipe, this is partly what I'm walking through. Keep fresh in my mind the qualities of that. When you come to the land here, you start thinking about, well, I think about up, down, east, west, north, south. That's only 6. Where are the other 2? There's 8 points in that star, but there's 8 poles in the floodwatch. Maybe there's that 6, but there's 2 that are not in there. One of them is being talked about as being the unknown. You say, whoa, whoa, whoa. There's 2 that are having to be added. One of them is forgiveness. That's the remorse part, which we're not talking about it because we don't have purpose in our communities. We're going back to we can bring our people that come out of prison home. Recreation. We're having to think about remorse. We're having to think about forgiveness. In that healing circle. We're at home, we're preparing the taking of that step. The other side of that one is the creation. Acknowledging about when you take the flesh. Thanking somebody for their generosity. Creator became generous. He provided for us. Good. Reconnecting ourselves with spirit. With the generosity assists in doing. And then with the forgiveness, when we fall down, learn how to pick that back up. Nurture it so we can take it back home again. With that story there about does God kill Lucifer? He leaves you with a message. Crucifixion. In the story, it says, forgive them. You don't know what they're doing. Come here to be part, to live with, to try and teach, inform. But it seems they're just not getting. So our 7 fire teaching walk that same journey. There's an element of choice there that's left for you to decide. The hope is that you will follow that road that takes you down this one way, the positive. That you'll see this negative one. It's one to be avoided. But that not swim. That's where it's thinking and feeling. If you carry it well, hope is that it will be maintained. So in those stories of our Christian brothers, we say, yes, there's good stories there, there's beautiful stories. There's beautiful teaching there. It's sending us the same kind of message. That's why when Peter, when he was drawing those diagrams, put the two together. We picked that one up and we put it into that silver covenant. Part of the swim we shared something. So we got it here. Questions or thoughts? When you try to share this with children, it's very abstract. They're not going to understand. But they will understand your hugging them. So we teach them from the level that they're at. So at home with our communities, there's much that we're having to do. Big part is getting over the fear that this is evil. It's not evil. We have to know that. That's why we say it's to us. We have left our teachers, the way we talk about our experience, we say we're still holding on. Creator helps us because we understand that how we look, how we interpret, how we should. So in those lodges, when we sit down with the old ones, that's really different. The old grandpa, when he was on his last days, he was picking up his rattle. Singing his songs. He'd sing all night, sundown to sunbreak. Not to live in town. It's off his memory of the living. Do that. We also do that during human times. So the life has passed from the body. We got to help this one. They're not in pain anymore. They're going to back home to check in, but they're going to be here. Accept them. People at home, when they lose their loved ones, tell them, pick up their medicine. Keep some time to go out onto the land, someplace that you would visit with your loved one. Visit with them. Cry with them, laugh with them, talk with them. On the way, take some time to visit with them. Important. For me, Rich, you get a picture of the dragon before you look at it. Cool, that's my. Send it a extra. I really.
We had a snowstorm.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, it was
Oh.
like full on white out when we left the suit.
Oh.
Yeah, to the point where you turn around that echo and go home and then just keep passing through the